Want entertainment designed just for you? Then check out customizable streaming TV from Xfinity. It makes your life simple, easy, awesome.
Xfinity gives you customizable streaming TV options. Enjoy the most free shows anywhere on any device, and even access your streaming apps right on your TV with X1. Go to Xfinity.com, call 1-800-XFINITY, or visit a store today to learn more. Restrictions apply.
Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome. You're listening to Perfectly Healthy and Toned Radio with your host, Darren Fatman McDuff. And now, prepare to get fat. Hey. Welcome back to another episode of Perfectly Healthy and Toned Radio. I'm your host, Darren McDuffie, and tonight we have another exciting show for you. It feels like I've been off the air for such a long time, but I believe it was about a week ago when I talked to Mark McAfee regarding raw milk and wanted to remind you of that show if you don't know what raw milk is, like I didn't. Probably about 3-4 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer than that, I had no idea what the word raw meant. Mark does a great job of explaining that, and we take you through a lot of different things, talking about homogenization, pasteurization, all kinds of different things when it comes to milk. I know some people out there are still milk drinkers, and the question is, are you drinking the right kind of milk? So listen to the show and find out. That show is called The Writ of Raw Milk with Mark McAfee, and that was my last show. Tonight, we have a return guest to the show, Pam Killeen. Pam is a nutritionist, and her and I have talked at length on air, both on the air and off the air, about certain things, and really excited to have her back to talk about her book, Extinction, The Hidden Epidemic. For many of you who have been following the news and the media, we lost a musical icon not long ago, Prince, or the artist formerly known as Prince. And part of that, I think, was opioid addiction. He had some kind of issue with his hip, which, the public doesn't know these things until after something happens. So tonight, wanted to talk a little bit to Pam about that and also get the scoop, the inside scoop, so to speak, on addiction and the hidden epidemic. And it's not so much as illegal drugs, but more so legal drugs that people are becoming addicted to. So we'll get right into that. Pam Killeen, welcome to Perfectly Healthy and Toned Radio. How are you tonight?
I'm great. Darren, can you hear me all right?
Yep, I can hear you good.
Beautiful. Okay, it was great to be back on the show.
Well, great to have you back.
That's great. That's one of my favorite subjects as well, talking about addiction, and you're absolutely right. We have a major crisis on our hands. In fact, actually, addiction is our number one health problem. It's a bigger health problem than cancer, diabetes, and heart disease combined.
Yeah, I was just saying before you got on that we lost a musical icon not months ago, and a lot of people were torn up about that. And I remember I always try to let the fallout happen first, and then you kind of figure out what was going on. And it seems as though Prince had some issue with his hip from performing for all those many years and all the dancing and all the stuff that he was doing. But he had they say an opiate addiction. So, the truth ends up coming out. And tonight, we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, a lot of what's happening today, of course, is we're over-exercising, we are eating very nutrient-deficient diets, and so ultimately, and I'm oversimplifying this, we're starving our brains, we're damaging our bodies in so many different ways that to try and compensate for the deficiencies that we're all experiencing, we reach out to drugs to try and help us. And unfortunately, where drugs are concerned, there's a double-edged sword, because many of the drugs that we're turning to are robbing Peter to pay Paul. So while we might get some comfort from a lot of these drugs, they actually cause a lot of damage. And so the side effects are quite severe and in many cases very insidious. A lot of people are grateful for the instant relief, but are oblivious at the same time to many side effects that they might be encountering.
Yeah. So, Pam, what made you want to write this book? Because it's not a sexy topic, and it's kind of one of those things that kind of flies under the radar because we are so conditioned to believe a lot of things that we see on TV. And my background comes from pharma, so I was always taught about adverse events and different kinds of things. But again, this is not a sexy topic. What made you decide to write this book?
One of the reasons why I decided to write the book is because we're turning our children into addicts. Our children are incredibly compromised today, and how are we going to expect our next generation to take care of us when they are already so weak to begin with? And so I see the long-term ramifications of this mood disorder and addiction epidemic combined. Our kids are so incredibly weak. They're so chronically fatigued. They have so much lethargy, apathy. They can barely get out of bed in the morning, a lot of them. I mean, I'm not saying this is 100% true with every kid, but it's certainly a very pervasive problem. And so, when I look at even my old high school, I see that the kids there are drinking coffee in huge amounts or caffeinated beverages. And I look at this phenomenon and I say, geez, in my era in high school, none of my peers drank coffee, like none. No, it was not heard of for teenagers to be drinking coffee. Parents knew it was bad for a developing body and a developing brain, right? So yet, that these caffeinated beverages are everywhere today. And caffeine is a very powerful stimulant. And like I mentioned earlier, stimulant is going to rob Peter to pay Paul. So as these kids are dependent on caffeine and let's not forget sugar, of course they're using potentially two stimulants, and each case you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and over time, you just keep wearing down the adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands carry some very important roles in our bodies. And if they're not working properly, you're not going to be energized. You're not going to be a happy person. You're not going to sleep well at night. You're not going to wake up in the morning feeling refreshed. You're not going to have a great libido, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Getting into a little bit about legal drugs versus illegal drugs, because when people think about drugs in our society, they tend to think about the illegal drugs, cocaine, marijuana, different types of things that are out there now. But it's more so the legal drugs. You mentioned caffeine, which people don't even think caffeine is a drug, but it actually is. But it's more of the legal drugs that people are becoming addicted to. I mentioned Prince and the opioids and, things like Vicodin and other things of that nature. But kind of distinguish between what's going on, because again, people think more of the illegal drugs versus the legal drugs and the addiction behind those.
Well, I think part of the problem is that, yes, it's the availability that is a huge problem. Then you have potential very specialized circumstances where, for example, people are in pain and they're being prescribed an opiate, and the doctor overprescribes the opiate, and the individual can't get enough of it because the threshold keeps increasing, so they start doctor shopping or whatever. So they just keep increasing their dose and become terribly addicted to the drug. And then there's not enough awareness within the doctors to start recognizing this phenomenon or trying to do more things to prevent the phenomenon from happening in the first place. So there's many, many different dynamics. And so for me to talk about malnutrition as being a cause is a bit of an oversimplification, but I do think it's something that has got to be instrumental in terms of anybody's recovery. Without recognizing malnutrition in the area of addiction, we're doing people a great disservice.
Yeah. Did you want to say something else? I'm sorry.
Well, absolutely. I mean, when I'm working with anybody who's coming off of any drug, no matter what the name of the drug, one of the things I have to do is make sure that they're getting enough animal fat in the diet, because we need that animal fat to keep the blood sugar stable. And that's one of the reasons why people might turn to certain drugs, is because their blood sugar is just, all over the map. And so they're very destabilized because they're not eating enough food over the course of the day. And so they will turn to the drug to try and compensate for that. And that's got to be the backbone of getting anybody into recovery. I have some heroin addicts that I've worked with, some opiate addicts that I've worked with, and to get them to eat 3 square meals a day, they're so destabilized. It's hard for them to even imagine eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That the drug is really what's getting them through the day, and so sitting down to eating 3 square meals a day is inconceivable for a lot of them.
Yeah. What causes us to become addicted? It seems like there's a lot more stress in our world today. People don't know how to relax. More people are depressed. More people have anxiety. Is that why we are facing this addiction epidemic?
Exactly. So essentially the mood disorder is the precursor to the addiction epidemic. And why are we seeing the mood disorder epidemic? It's because we are so incredibly malnourished. So if you look at the evolution of our diet since, let's just even say, before World War II, right? Before World War II, we were actually fairly healthy as a society. And largely this had a lot to do with the fact that we did sit down religiously and eat bacon and egg style breakfast, a meat and potato style lunch and dinner. That was still very much the norm. We didn't have red meat phobia, we didn't have fat phobia, we didn't have cholesterol phobia, liver phobia, dairy phobia, gravy phobia. We didn't have any of those types of food phobias before World War II. You have people born, in 1990 or 2000, the younger people today, they may not realize how new this phenomenon really is. That really throughout all of human history, we didn't suffer from fat or animal fat phobia or cholesterol phobia. That throughout all of human history, we celebrated those foods. And it was only after World War II where there was a dramatic change in our diet, and a change for the worst. So we, after World War II, we started adopting a low-fat diet. So that's when we started developing, animal fat and cholesterol phobia. So we started drinking low-fat dairy or eating low-fat dairy products. We started buying more lean meats. We started peeling the skin off our chicken and turkey. We started changing our diet radically after World War II, and that's when you start to see more and more and more mood disorders come to the surface. So if you look at my example, for example, in the 1970s, as a teenage girl, I was told I had to eat a low-fat diet, so I started drinking skim milk. I would be following 500-calorie-a-day diets because I thought I was fat. Of course, I wasn't, but that's what was being marketed at the time, so you end up buying into it, unfortunately, or at least I did. And, I was eating a totally nutrient-deficient diet. I was getting hardly any nutrition in my diet whatsoever. And so if I fast forward 10 years from the time, from being a teenager into my 20s, for example, that's when I collapsed with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. And that was in the 1980s. So in the 1980s, you see a huge increase in especially women collapsing with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. And I was just one of the lucky ones that I did not turn towards drugs. I was just really, really lucky in that regard. But I think when I was really, really sick, I was so sick that I couldn't tolerate sugar. I couldn't tolerate caffeine, that those drugs made me feel really, really sick. So for some strange reason, I didn't go down the path of seeking out drugs for comfort. But that doesn't, that still tells me, though, that I have to have empathy for anybody out there struggling who has turned towards drugs to try and find relief from their fatigue, their depression, their brain fog, their anxiety, their OCD, their insomnia, and so on. So they're no different than I felt. I know that. It's universal. I mean, this is what I work with every single day, is clients struggling with those types of conditions. And in some cases, drugs are an issue, and in some cases, drugs are really not a big issue. But they're struggling at any degree, at any way you look at it, that they're saying, I'm not going to settle for feeling this way. And so if I have a client who's on an opiate drug, or if I have a client who's addicted to sugar or caffeine or meth or Prozac, for me, a drug is a drug is a drug, right? If people need a drug to get through the day, then I know that they're unwell, and I know that the root cause of the problem is the adrenal glands. So I have to work with the physical in order to turn the mental back on, you see. And that's yet another reason why I wrote my addiction book, is because I wanted people who have addiction issues to understand that they are not struggling with a personality flaw or a moral defect, that what they're really struggling with is a physical problem.
Yeah, I wanted to get into a couple of questions there, and you kind of brought up just one of them. A lot of times we think addiction, because I remember I used to think like this. When I would see someone overweight, before I got into nutrition and got a little bit deeper into it, when I saw someone overweight, I would always say, well, why doesn't that person just eat less food? And kind of relate that to willpower. But it's not about willpower, is it?
No, not at all. I mentioned the adrenal glands earlier, and the adrenal glands actually control the balance of minerals in our body. And so when the minerals go out of balance, and that happens as we stress the adrenal glands, then this has an effect on our metabolism. And so what's really happening is we're throwing off our metabolism due to the many, many different kinds of stressors that we're exposed to today. And some of these stressors are actually very invisible. You know, so we have environmental stress, we have emotional stress, and we have nutritional stress. And so we have, hundreds, if not thousands, of different stressors that are taxing our adrenal glands. And so once we imprint the stress on those adrenal glands, that imprint can have a permanent effect on the body unless people learn how to undo that imprint. And so that's why, Darren, that's why so many people have trouble burning their fuel. That's why so many people may be following diets and never, losing weight, is because they haven't addressed fixing the adrenal glands and getting those minerals in balance so that their metabolism is burning their fuel at a normal rate. And so that ties into people who are struggling with obesity just as equally as it can tie into people who are over burning their fuel. In other words, people who are in what I call fast oxidation, so they're eating and eating and eating all day long and they can't gain any weight. They're painfully thin, and they're they're very sick as well, just as sick as people who are struggling with obesity.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you something and just get your opinion on this, because I tend to get in these I call them YouTube tirades. When I click on something, I click on something on YouTube, and then it leads me to something else. And before I know it, I'm 4 or 5 hours into something. And I'm a bit of a curious person, and I'm always learning. But one of the things I came across when I was viewing YouTube one time was something about mind control. And one of the strategies that they use to help to bring about this mind control or controlling other individuals is the food deprivation. They don't give them any food. We don't have food deprivation, but we have so much food, but yet people are, you mentioned it earlier, malnourished. Is this one of the reasons why we are suffering from some of these conditions like depression and anxiety and all these other behavioral conditions, just simply because we're not getting the right type of nutrients versus depriving people of food?
Well, if you want to look at it, I bring it down to greed and incompetence, by the way. Rather than calling it a conspiracy, I say it's about greed and incompetence. Yeah. It's 6 of one, a half dozen of another in terms of what camp you want to come from here. But essentially, the low-fat diet, which is the big problem, right? Our government, has been, promoting a low-fat diet now for several decades. And I don't know if you read my survival book. It's called Survival of the Unfittest, and it's about the decline of human sexuality, which does also tie into this addiction story as well. But, when you put people on a low-fat diet, you're going to reduce their fertility. So the population is going to go down. And we see that here in Canada. We see that we see that south of the border in the United States. There are countries all around the world where you're seeing fewer babies being born. And so it's not happening in every country, but there are some countries where definitely there are fewer babies being born. So, that can control the population right there, is just putting people on a low-fat diet. The other thing you can talk about where food is concerned, of course, is throughout all of history, governments have known that you can control people via the food supply. Mm-hmm. Governments also know that you can control people via drugs, right? So if you malnourish people, you brain starve them, and they turn towards drugs, of course, then it's a win-win situation essentially for many high players out there. But it's not working for us, the people. That's the trouble. It's not working for us that we're so miserable and unhappy, and that we're so exhausted and we can't think straight, and our kids can barely function at school. And when they do graduate from school, and are they strong enough to take on a full-time job? A lot of these kids today, there's a very high youth unemployment rate today, and I don't think it's because they can't find work. I think it's because they're too tired to get to work.
Yeah. Let's talk about kids for a bit, because you struck a chord there. Many of our kids are medicated. As soon as the kid can't pay attention in class. I was one of those kids that could not pay attention in class. And I figured out later on it's because I was bored more so than, I had ADD or anything. But now parents are more apt to medicate their kids. Is this a gateway into addiction because they're medicating the kids earlier?
Yeah, so if they're using things like Ritalin, it's a stimulant. And how much, like when they're on the Ritalin, what's their dose initially, and then it kind of wears thin, so they have to up the dose again and then up the dose again, and then when the kid ends up in their 20s and 30s, what are they going to need then in order to have an attention, right? An attention span. So it's kind of like a gateway drug in a sense, because, I know that they call marijuana a gateway drug and so on, but that's an oversimplification, because any drug can be a gateway drug simply because they wear and tear on the adrenal glands in many cases. And the more you wear and tear on the adrenal glands, then, it only stands to reason that you're going to need more drugs in the long run to try and get yourself through the day. So in the morning, people might need, like nicotine is an interesting drug because it can act as a stimulant or a sedative, right? So some people in the morning, you'll see them having their cigarette and their coffee and possibly even some sugar, okay? So there you have three potential stimulants working in unison vis-a-vis what that person might require. So they'll dose themselves. They'll figure out how much of each they need in order to try and get to work in the morning. But by 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the drugs are all kind of reaching, sort of hitting rock bottom, and they know if they overdo those drugs that they won't potentially go to sleep at night. Now, some people find nicotine puts them to sleep, so the nicotine might solve that problem, but guess what? A lot of people, the nicotine isn't enough, so they might turn to alcohol as their downer at night to try and get them to sleep at night. Mm-hmm. So people are always adjusting their drugs, and some of the ones I just mentioned are some of the more common drugs. Marijuana is a very favorite drug for a lot of people right now. A lot of the same marketing that has been used to market cigarettes is now being used to market marijuana. And I see some devastating side effects from people who have become dependent on marijuana. A lot of people want to believe it's a really safe and effective drug, and it's far from that. I see the amotivational disorder, the memory problems. I see these people loaded in cadmium and nickel, which, very toxic metals. I see all sorts of different symptoms developing from people who are addicted to marijuana. But it's interesting how the marijuana camp has basically used the cigarette industry as a template to do very similar marketing to get their drug out there. And I always say to people, listen, if you need a drug to get through the day, then that's telling me that you're not healthy. And why not just get healthy first so you don't need to depend on a drug? But, I'm maybe too much of a pragmatist.
Yeah, I think it's escape. A lot of people are looking to escape their lives. I think it's a deeper issue, that's going on. I think it's some physical stuff that's going on, but also there's some stuff going on as far as, looking to escape the everyday life. A lot of people are just not happy. I live in Florida.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell me the rest of your story, Darren. No, go ahead. I'll finish later. You go ahead.
I'm going to say, I was going to say, we talked about kids, and I live in Florida, and Florida seems to be, we have an older population. A lot of older people come to retire here. And one of the things that is seen here is you have a lot of seniors on a lot of different medications. And I remember from my pharmaceutical days that the more medications you take, the more propensity you have for adverse reactions. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that within the senior population, because adverse events can really be fatal.
Mm-hmm. Oh, most definitely. And they're on, cocktails of drugs, 15, 20 medications at a time. So, yeah, I mean, these drugs can actually, especially in combination, kill people. People are not asking enough questions, period. It's like I was talking to a retired teacher the other day, and she said when her kids would, when the kids were on a break, they'd be in the back of the classroom comparing how many drugs they're on and the dose. They would, my dose is higher than your dose, and I'm on more drugs than you're on. And this was just in primary school.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing's happening with our seniors, is that they're put on these cocktails of drugs, and obviously these drugs are just making them all sicker, but the drugs are being promoted as something that's going to make you healthier, and it's far from the truth, because every year that person is relying on a drug or many drugs to allegedly make them healthier, they're avoiding fixing the root cause of the problem. So inevitably, not only are they dealing with the side effect of the drug, they're also dealing with the fact that they're ignoring what's making them feel sick in the first place. So they're not really, for example, going to fully address diet the way they should be. They're not possibly going to be resting as much as they should be. They're not, looking at many, many different other aspects of their lives that are going to make them healthy, genuinely so, versus a drug that is going to make them more toxic and make them sicker in the long run simply because they're being used as a red herring.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's what I see happening vaccines are very similar too, right? Because, the vaccine industry markets their products as something that's going to make the population really healthy. That's how they're marketed, right? Vaccines are marketed to make us healthy, right? And we spend billions and billions of dollars every year on vaccines, and we keep getting sicker and sicker and sicker. So I say to the government, why don't you take those billions of dollars and actually teach people how to prepare 3 wholesome meals a day and make sure that, there's some accountability so everybody, returns to the way we used to eat when we were much healthier.
Yeah, it just seems as though we have so much knowledge, but yet we're going so far away from, the basics, and people are not well, and we keep going further and further away from the simple things, the way that life used to be, and it just seems like, I don't know, it just seems like we're getting smarter, but in a way we're getting dumber as well.
Well, there's a lot of things behind that. A lot of it is because of the information overload we're getting on the internet. So you go on the internet and, this site promises you this and another site promises you that. And so there's a lot of confusion in that realm. And then you have the other component where people are chronically fatigued. They might be able to work a 9-to-5 job, but by the time they get home, they're so exhausted and they're so overwhelmed by all this information that all they can do is, watch reality TV. So everything is all kind of is set up that one system is essentially enabling another system, and it keeps everybody in this state where they just feel like they're spinning their wheels. They might remember having energy when they were a teenager. If they're lucky, they remember having some real energy in their lives, having really good cognition, wonderful creativity, enthusiasm, and so on. They might remember those feelings. And they might know that they have a goal to try and get back to feeling that good. So they fight hard, and they may fight harder than the average person because they have a memory. But a lot of our young people today are born sick, so they have no real incentive to try and feel better. And that's the scariest thing to me that's happening out there today, is people are just basically, settling for being in this bad mood, and which in turn would mean the drug use is not going to go down anytime soon.
You mentioned a little bit about blood sugar regulation. Can't talk, sorry. But it's been a long day. One of the things that got me into exploring more about blood sugar regulation and carbohydrates in general was I stumbled across a lecture by Russell Blaylock, and on that lecture, he talked about how they took prisoners, the worst prisoners, violent offenders, and they ended up changing their diets. And what they found was some of those violent offenders were hypoglycemic. And then also I stumbled across another article. I was just reading something one day, and they linked hypoglycemia to alcoholism. Like, a lot of people are using alcohol to raise their blood sugar levels, which can cause, behavioral problems. And we're seeing a lot of this in our society now. So I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit about carbohydrates, blood regulation. This is a loaded topic, blood sugar regulation, and the fallout from that, the hyperglycemia, the hypoglycemia, and how that can affect us. And a lot of people think if we just go and I just get a pill for this, when it could be, something really simple as just regulating your blood sugar.
Oh, yeah. You'll notice, no matter how sick somebody is, if they're eating 3 square meals a day, which would mean they'd have a better blood sugar control, they're going to start feeling better. I'm not necessarily saying it's enough to get people back to running on all 8 cylinders, but they're going to notice an improvement in their moods. So, yeah, absolutely. To learn from our ancestors who were happier and were healthier than us, is they would eat plenty of animal fat at breakfast, at lunch, and at dinner. And so that kept their blood sugar stable over the course of the day. And by keeping the blood sugar stable, of course, this would stabilize the mood. So, as I mentioned earlier, I have to make sure that my clients are able to produce, 3 square meals per day, that they're going to, put the meal together, sit down, and eat 3 square meals per day, every day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. Because as soon as they start skipping meals or waiting too long in between meals, then I know their blood sugar is going to crash, and they're going to have their cravings. The cravings are going to be that much more pronounced, right? So we've got to win at mood issues, we've got to make sure people are returning to basics, like you said, and eat those, 3 square meals a day, the bacon and egg style breakfast, the meat and potato style lunch and dinner. And I say that very figuratively. Of course, it doesn't have to be potatoes. It could be cooked broccoli, cooked cauliflower, cooked beans, something along that line, cooked spinach, lathered in butter, of course.
Yeah.
And then, you're talking about,
fat.
like, those are foods that we happily ate before World War II. So you're absolutely right that, when they've studied prisoners and so on, alcoholics, yes, they have terrible blood sugar control. So if people are going to, have any takeaway points from this interview, the number one thing you have to do to help support your mood and hopefully reduce addictive cravings is to eat your 3 square meals a day religiously. I'm talking, like I said earlier, 7 days a week. You've got to get into that routine. And you'll notice, Darren, when people are struggling with mood disorders and addiction, if you sit down and talk to them, you're going to hear them say, oh, they skip breakfast, or, oh, they might only eat 1 meal a day, or, oh, they don't have an appetite, or whatever the case may be. So you're going to hear all sorts of very irregular habits coming from people who have mood disorders and addiction.
I think people need to look no further than when, you don't eat, you tend to get grumpy. I know I do. It's like when I want to eat, I want to eat. So it's like you get grumpy. So that's truth enough that you need to be eating a square meal. I wanted to get into veganism, vegetarianism, but I don't want to. I know there's people out there who are vegan and vegetarian, but animal fats versus plant-based, and you mentioned how animal fats help regulate blood sugar. But I wanted to get more into the copper thing, because what I noticed from just looking at things and being an eye out there and just being curious is that people who are vegan or vegetarian tend to have more behavioral issues, like they're more moody. Some people have social disorders. And in the book, you talk about copper and the plants being providing more copper and not enough zinc. Talk about that a little bit.
Oh, it's the backbone of what I do. So my clients were either near vegetarian, or vegan. The sickest of my clients are going to be the ones who were vegan, and that includes me, by the way. I'm a recovering vegan. So I can't say enough bad things about following both either a vegetarian or vegan diets, or near vegetarian for that matter. They're all bad diets, so I can be just as critical of a near vegetarian diet as I can be of a vegan diet. It's just unfortunate that the vegans are going to be that much more malnourished, and they're going to have some pretty tragic symptoms. But what happens is exactly what you just described. So they're eating a copper-rich diet because they're eating the emphasis of their food, of course, is going to be on plants. So plants tend to be high in copper, low in zinc. Animal foods tend to be high in zinc and low in copper. And since humans have developed and evolved on animal foods, of course, we're transitioning to a plant-based diet is brand new to us. It's foreign to us. We haven't evolved in this way, so it contradicts our healthy biochemistry. And so all of my clients are what are known as copper toxic. They have way too much copper stored up in their bodies. And it's not just because they were near vegetarian, or vegan. It also couples with the problems of copper pipes, the fact that copper is added to city water as an antifungal. It's also exacerbated by potentially even birth control pills, copper IUDs. Swimming in swimming pools or sitting in hot tubs. There's all sorts of ways to take in too much copper. And so what copper is going to do is it's going to interfere with the functioning of the adrenal glands. Because as far as the adrenal glands are concerned, all this excess copper is extremely toxic. And it's the job of the adrenal glands to send a message out in the body to grab at that copper and basically guide it out of the body through, in the toilet. So at any rate, because people are so copper toxic, the mechanisms that are in place to kick this excess copper out, are too weak to do their job. So we're just so bombarded with copper that our systems have broken down, and we don't know how to get rid of that copper anymore. So that's what I have to do with my clients, is I've got to help methodically and systematically start pulling out that toxic copper. And the problem in doing that is that, yes, it's toxic in the host, and it's causing all sorts of mood issues like fatigue and depression and brain fog and anxiety and low libido and insomnia. It's causing all sorts of symptoms. But pulling the copper out is not comfortable. So it's even though it's not serving the host to be stuck in the body, it's really hard on the host to pull it out of hiding. And so when I'm working with my clients, I tell them they have to be as tough as a Navy SEAL to work with me, because we have to get rid of some long-term damage in order to allow the body to actually genuinely and truly heal. So it's tough to get rid of the copper. It's not a straightforward, easy process at all. My clients are working with me. I've got clients I've been working with for 4 or 5 years. It really depends on how sick they are when they start with me. It depends on their age. It depends on how compliant they are on my program and so on. So if you think about somebody who's 40 years old, it took them 40 years of accumulation, you see, to get to where they are. And to fix this problem is not going to happen in a year. It's not going to happen in 2 years. It's going to take time to get that copper out of the body. But it's really the backbone of getting people to back to running on all 8 cylinders is I have to get rid of the copper.
Yeah. I want to kind of stay on that theme of talking about vegan, vegetarians, and kind of morph into homocysteine, because from reading your book, one of the things I gathered that raises our homocysteine is and this could be the general population as well, is the consuming of grains, But it sticks in my mind more with vegan vegetarianism because I remember reading an article about a year or two ago where this guy was a staunch vegan. I don't know if he's vegan or vegetarian. And he just had a sudden heart attack. And one of the things that raises your heart attack risk is having now we know this is that homocysteine levels are very high. So I wanted you to kind of delve into that.
Yeah, and that does tie into the copper as well, actually.
Okay.
But you're right. I mean, homocysteine is a marker essentially that there's just too much inflammation going on in the body, and so and part of that inflammation response is coming because of the copper pushing on the adrenal glands. So it's nice. I mean, I always say everything is always connected, right?
Yeah.
So if people are having high homocysteine, then it's not simple enough to just fix the homocysteine by giving somebody, for example, B vitamins. I wish it were that cut and dried, and if somebody wants to try that and it works for them, that's great. But if they haven't gotten rid of the copper, it's going to be really hard to get the homocysteine under control. So it is a prevalent factor. It is a very prevalent issue. I don't know in the United States how much homocysteine testing is done as part of a yearly physical, for example. But I know here where I live in Ontario, here in Ontario, a lot of the testing is covered by the government. But I think people have to pay out of pocket for a homocysteine test. I'm not sure how it works in the United States. But very few people know about it as a marker for heart disease or inflammation or any of those types of conditions. But it's it's not a straight. If taking B vitamins is going to help you, great. But if that's not enough, then you still have to look at the copper as a factor.
Yeah. Getting into a little bit more about cholesterol and its importance, because I believe in the book you said 60% of our brain is made up of cholesterol. And when you look at something like statins, which are lowering our cholesterol, I'm wondering if that has a legitimate gripe. Anyone can have a legitimate gripe about having a behavior or mood disorder when you're lowering the cholesterol, because obviously it's going to affect the brain, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So where cholesterol, I think in my book I have a small section on low-fat diets and how they contribute to mood disorders. And that ties into the low cholesterol. So if you're low-fat, you're going to be on a low-cholesterol diet as well. And we need that cholesterol in order to build hormones, for example. We need that cholesterol, just like you mentioned, we need that cholesterol to help essentially with the structure of the brain, right? We need that cholesterol essentially to help build the cell membrane. So, and as they say, you're only as healthy as your cell membrane. And, yet cholesterol is one of the main building blocks for the cell membrane. And it's crazy that we've been on this low-fat diet, because essentially what that means is we're falling apart at the seams. We don't have the glue to bind the cell membrane together. And so, if you feel like you're falling apart at the seams and you've been on a low-cholesterol diet, that's maybe you've just had some people have just had a revelation, because that's how I felt when I was a vegan. I felt like my body was falling apart at the seams. I'm like, oh God, I didn't have the cholesterol to bind my body together. Essentially, I had the chronic pain, and I had the chronic fatigue, and all those types of symptoms. My memory, I had no memory at all. I mean, you look at Alzheimer's disease or dementia. I mean, you look at the low-fat diet for those problems, I mean, yes, metals will play a role as well, but, we have to have the cholesterol and, present in the fat. We have to have those things present in our diet in order to support brain function.
Getting into neurotransmitters and obviously epinephrine, dopamine, things like that. And it was, maybe about a year ago, I was supposed to have Julia Ross on, and we got everything crossed up. And hopefully I'm going to get her on the show in maybe October or November before I close out the year. she's writing another book. So, but going back to those things, the neurotransmitters and our diet and the precursors to those things, what's going on? It just seems like I want to use this term, but then I don't want to use this term. But it just seems like everybody's going nuts now, going bananas.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if it's just poor diet, stressed out, all kind of things that are in the mix right now. What's going on?
Well, when you're talking about the neurotransmitters, the amino acids essentially build the neurotransmitters in the brain. And yet, when you're talking about amino acids, you cannot exclude fat, because fat and protein obviously happen together in nature. So when I talk about protein here, or amino acids, do not set that aside, from the fat. So I don't want anybody running out there taking, protein powders, right?
Yeah.
So the neurotransmitters are built from the amino acids, and one of the things that has to happen for us to actually properly absorb the complete protein from chicken or beef or eggs or what have you is our stomach acid has to be in the correct pH for us to break down the protein into the amino acids so that they can, build our muscle and at the same time even, fuel our neurotransmitters, right? So one of the things that's going awry is that we're not eating enough animal foods in our diet today. Another thing that has gone awry is we've destroyed our digestion, right? And so because our digestion is so weak, when we eat animal foods, we may not break them down properly in our digestive tract. So we may not fully absorb those amino acids and therefore properly fuel our neurotransmitters. So I always tell my clients, I want you to trick your stomach into thinking it's acidic, because it's probably not acidic enough. So some people might take hydrochloric acid, betaine hydrochloric acid in their regimen. Some people, I'm more favorable for people including things like raw sauerkraut in their diet, or other lacto-fermented foods, which are nicely acidic and will help you break down your meals as you eat them. They're great digestive aids, in other words. So even kefir and yogurt, right? So those are things that you should be including in your meals to help you assimilate the food that you're taking in.
Yeah.
Does that all make sense? Because the digestive system is a pretty hot topic for me, anyway.
Yeah, you know what? I was going to ask you about just gut flora, because a lot of people out there have what I would term bad guts. And even breaking down food and not necessarily getting the nutrients that they need can kind of resolve itself in just not having, behavioral problems and brain disorders in general.
Oh, yeah. Well, the lacto-fermented foods are just pure medicine. They're so good for you, right? So, eating those with your meals is going to help you hopefully better assimilate your meals. And I think you and I have talked about coffee enemas in the past. There's another thing that has gone awry with the digestion and this gets really complicated. But essentially, the bile, because of the copper toxicity, the bile gets really, really thick, like toothpaste, right? And it becomes more prone to forming gallstones. So I can guarantee you that, the vast majority of your listeners have hundreds, if not thousands, of gallstones trapped in their bile duct system. And so even if the liver is strong enough to produce bile, enough bile that is, it's probably not getting through the bile duct system properly. So you have to, on the one hand, you have to tone the liver via the coffee enemas, but you also have to identify and fix the gallstones, and that's doing the liver gallbladder flush. So it's what I basically call it is optimizing, bile production and flow. It's really important to get the bile production up and the flow improving, and that's what I have to do with my clients. It's an ongoing saga with my clients. We talk about it a lot, and I have a support group that I use for my clients, and it's probably one of the most popular conversations we have is about the liver gallbladder flush. Because as soon as we can start getting those gallstones out of there, then that's when usually my clients start reporting that they're feeling better.
something that's rarely mentioned, and I wanted to touch on and wanted you to talk a little bit about that, and you talk a little bit about that in the book itself, is infections. A lot of people have infections. They don't really know that they have infections, and that can result in behavioral issues as well, because you have an infection in your body. You don't know you have an infection. So kind of expand on that for me.
Oh, yeah, I see this a lot. So my trigger before I collapsed was being exposed to mold, and that, I got a terrible infection from that, and that, I had no immune system basically, so I collapsed with chronic fatigue and, basically lost most of my 20s and 30s. So, infection was my last straw. And when I'm working with my clients and we start manipulating, the minerals and start getting the immune system turned back on again, as they get stronger and stronger and stronger, old infections are going to come out of them. So almost all of my clients are going to get an extraordinary amount of symptoms such as the flu, colds, sinus infection, lung infections, inner ear infection, right? They're going, even shingles, things like that. I'm going to see a host of infections come up when I'm working with my clients. And I warn them all in advance. I say, this has to happen so that you can get well. So you're absolutely right, Darren. Those infections burrow or sequester deep into the body. And when you don't have any energy, they stay stuck in the body, and they will linger and cause and essentially wreak havoc on your health, mental and physical health, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I have to, as I'm working with my clients and we're moving things like copper, of course, these infections come up, and they will manifest themselves as they're working with me. And that's why I'm such a big fan of sauna therapy, because you can try and cook those infections out or try to keep them under control by applying, your body or exposing your body to heat. And because that's what Hippocrates used to say, give me a fever and I can cure any illness, right? So right. If you can synthetically induce a fever through a hot bath or a sauna, you might be able to get some of these infections under control when and if they do come out. But there's no question that, if people are struggling with chronic health problems, there's going to be infection festering in there somewhere.
Yeah. I think we got maybe about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to get into solutions, because a lot of times I think we listen to these programs and there are no solutions. You mentioned working with clients. If someone who's out there who's listening and suspects that they might have an issue with this addiction and they want to move forward in a more holistic way, what are some steps that they might take in order to start moving towards kicking these substances or kicking the depression or anxiety?
Okay. So, I love what I do, because my clients, if they listen, they call me Sergeant Pam. So if they listen to Sergeant Pam, I love what I do, because my clients can and will get their lives back. I'm very rewarded, by the program that I have. So, but short of working with Sergeant Pam, absolutely every day, especially if you're symptomatic, you're going to want to do at least one coffee enema a day. You're going to, want to do saunas, hopefully every day. You're going to want to eat 3 square meals a day, and stop over-exercising. If you're an over-exerciser, if you're jogging, if you're on a treadmill, if you're rowing, if you're doing stairs, whatever the case may be, stop doing the cardio and start doing things like yoga or Pilates or Tai Chi or Qigong, something far more relaxing. You want to imagine that your adrenal glands are broken, like a broken arm or a broken leg. You want to keep them as static as possible so that they can actually heal. And doing those things that I just mentioned, you should start feeling some improvements. I'm not saying they're going to be enough to get you back to all 8 cylinders, because unfortunately I've got to trick the body in some ways to get that copper out. It's really difficult to get that copper out. So, but like I said, short of working with me, you've got to do those things to at least try and increase the quality of your life, because the trouble with weak adrenal glands and hidden copper toxicity is that if you don't deal with it, the copper just keeps accumulating year after year after year after year. and other metals will also accompany that. So we've got to start strengthening the adrenal glands is the key, and that means resting as much as is humanly possible. If you can get time off work and get 3 or 6 months worth of pure rest, that should also help you. But if you have to work part-time or full-time, you're going to have to learn how to rest in the evenings and on the weekends, and really exaggerate that rest. That's some of your best medicine right there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think people have forgotten how to relax. It's just like we tend to think it's relaxation, but we're constantly on our phones, checking our phones. It's just gotten nutty the way that we think we're relaxing, but we're looking forward to the next email or looking forward from the email from our boss or something. So we don't really truly know how to relax.
That's right. And so another thing I do with my clients is I teach them how to breathe properly. And unfortunately, we've been taught a lot of mythology about, taking deep breaths and that kind of thing. And unfortunately, that's the kind of thing that's causing us more problems. So I teach my clients a reduced breathing technique, which is also really incredible for helping turn on what is known as the parasympathetic system, which is the state of relaxation that we're all aspiring to be in, right? And so I'm actually I'm a Buteyko practitioner now. I actually teach the breath work along with my nutritional balancing program. And it's a beautiful marriage, combining the two systems, because the breathing helps calm my clients down dramatically, which is really important. It works way better than meditation, by the way. A lot of my clients can't meditate because they can't focus, right? So they far rather do the breath work. And like I said, it's not breath work like we imagine breath work. It's a very different form of breath work. So I got my training this year, and I'm very excited to use it with my clients, seeing some tremendous results with my clients.
Yeah, I just heard about that like maybe 2 years ago, and I bumped up into a practitioner at another job that I was working at, and we happened to get in a conversation. She was telling me about it. I knew nothing about that, but that was something that she specialized in. I think she was in like the Seattle area or somewhere at that time, if I recall correctly. But yeah, I know that that's some good stuff. And actually, meditation is more breathing, but I think with meditation, a lot of people tend to think it's going to be this. I've been doing meditation for 5 or 6 years now, but I think that we tend to think it's going to be this thing where we're floating in the clouds, and when it doesn't feel like that, because I mean, I'll tell anybody, I have monkey mind. Sometimes it's just my mind just wants to jump around, and then that on those days I'm like, okay, let me come out of meditation. And some days are easier to focus than others, but it's all about keep bringing your mind back, to that one point. But that's great. It's great that you can meditate. It's a tremendous tool to have in your toolkit, Darren. It's fantastic. Yeah, but I tell people that whatever works for you. Meditation might not work for most people. Then they may do the breathing like you advise. But everybody has to find their own thing, find what works for them. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Pam Killeen, always a good conversation with you. I did a video interview with you last year, I believe, on survival of the unfittest. For those of you who are out there listening or would be listening to the podcast later on, go back and listen to that interview, because that was a great interview as well. And your website is pamkilleen.com, if I'm not mistaken, right? Yeah, it's pamkilleen.com, and I have several teaching videos at Vimeo On Demand as well, where I talk a lot about some of the things we just mentioned. So. Okay, great. Hey, anything new? You writing a new book or anything? Yeah, I'm working on another book, and it's basically going to focus on my program that I use with my clients, because I find it's too difficult to explain in terms of the biochemistry. It's far too complex. So instead of talking about the complexities of biochemistry, I'm just going to talk about my clients' experience on my program. So I'm working on that book right now. Great. Pam Killeen, thank you so much for being on. It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and you keep up the great work there, Darren. Thank you. Okay, have a good night. All right. You too. Bye-bye. All right. So I believe Wednesday we're going to have Nursing Broth with Dr. Kayla T. Daniel. I believe that's with her. And then Friday I'm doing an interview that's going to be live again. Can't remember what time it is, but I'm going to have Dr. Jonathan Wright on. And actually, Pam Killeen mentioned him in the book. He has a book called Why Stomach Acid is Good for You. Very excited about having him on because I know he doesn't do a lot of videos. He's a very busy guy. So I'm going to do that Friday, and that'll be on for you. And then we'll go right into October. And October, the first interview is with Lisa. I think it's Lisa Elden Good, but it's on low dose naltrexone. For those of you who aren't familiar with low dose naltrexone, you will be when we get done with that interview. And I believe she's in England, so I'm trying to make sure everything is scheduled. So we'll have to record that one and get it up a little later. I had to abbreviate the schedule this October just simply because I went to a funeral. And anytime I get behind scheduling people, it's always to a disadvantage. So next October, I think I'll only have 4 interviews. I keep saying videos, I have no idea why, but 4 interviews. And on those interviews, there'll be 1 per week. And then in November, hopefully get back to the 2 interviews per week. And then December, I always pretty much take December off just to recharge, refuel my batteries, and then come back in January of 2017 with some new interviews, some new things. Still working on my new site. I actually took some pictures Friday, and those pictures are going to be up on the new site. And if you're on my Facebook friend or Facebook fan page, you'll probably see some of those pictures, and the new site will be up, and it'll be more podcast driven. Store, a lot of things will be on the new site, and it'll be called, well, I'm not going to say what it's going to be called because you might go there now and try to see it, but I want to debut it when it's all done. So thanks for listening. Peace and love, y'all. I'll see you Wednesday, same fat time, same fat channel. I'm out.
Have you heard? Metro by T-Mobile now includes Amazon Prime. Yes, enjoy the best of shopping and entertainment, movies, TV shows, music, free shipping, and much more. All included for just $40 per line for 3 lines. All on the T-Mobile network. Discover the smarter way. Metro by T-Mobile. That's genius. One offer per account. Offer subject to change. $12.99 per month value. Offer valid for new Amazon Prime members. Metro customers may notice reduced speeds versus some T-Mobile customers. Video at 480p. Capable device required. See store for details and terms and conditions.